What next for Colombia? Voters tacking conservative in the first presidential runoff to feature a straight choice between left and right in that Latin American country. 41-year-old Ivan Duque beating Gustavo Petro, the former mayor of Bogota. Just how far to the right will Duque go? The protege of hardline former President Alvaro Uribe insists he won't be tearing up the 2016 peace deal with Farc rebels, but Duque wants to seriously amend it. Can he? Will he? How will he handle the ELN, the smaller Marxist guerrilla group that's still active, and the broader issues that were tops in voters' minds? Corruption, poverty, inequality, also up in the air. Relations with a Trump administration that wants results in the crackdown on the drug trade, and those 800,000 Venezuelan refugees who have fled the political and economic meltdown that's over the border. How will the nationalist Duque deal with the leftists in power in Caracas? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Colombia's next president. Joining us from Bogota, former High Commissioner for Peace, Daniel Garcia Peña. He teaches political science at the National University. Thank you for being with us. We're pleased as well to welcome journalist Hassan Nassar. Thank you for joining us. And here in the studio, Luis Rivera Velez.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Luis Rivera Velez, a researcher at the research arm of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, Série. Yes. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back as well to Pascal Drouot, the founder of ICS, International Consulting and Strategy, also the author in French of Farc, Confessions of a Guerrilla Fighter. Welcome to the show. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Highest turnout in 2 decades. A 2 million vote margin, Ivan Duque pledging afterwards to unite a polarized Colombia. But as Shirley Sitbon reports, the future on that score remains unwritten.
As confetti was dropping on Ivan Duque, Colombia's president-elect vowed to unite the country.
No
more divisions. This is one country for everyone.
But the right-wing candidate also says that will not stop him from implementing one of the most divisive promises of his campaign, revising the peace deal with the Farc signed 2 years ago. The deal that ended 52 years of war in which more than 220,000 people were killed.
We will modify the peace agreement so that the victims are at the center of the process. We will guarantee truth, justice, reparations, so that violence doesn't repeat itself.
The deal grants amnesty to guerrilla leaders and the right for the Farc to become a political party. The president-elect says he will reverse these decisions by banning Farc from politics and prosecuting its leaders. Farc leader Rodrigo Londoño replied by asking to meet with the president-elect.
Good sense has to be imposed. People are demanding an integral peace that will lead to the hoped-for reconciliation.
Peace with Farc is one of many challenges Duque will have to face. The economy remains weak. Colombia is facing a wave of migrants from Venezuela due to the economic and political crisis there, and drug trafficking. Gangs have taken control of whole regions abandoned by Farc fighters.
Hassan Nassar, why did Colombians vote for Ivan Duque?
Well, there are many reasons why they decided to go with Duque, especially after the peace process was submitted to vote in 2016 and the majority of the no won that election. President Alvaro Uribe and ex-President Andrés Pastrana, they tried to unify a big portion of the political parties, traditional parties in Colombia, to try to fulfill and to do opposition to Juan Manuel Santos. And they succeeded in this election, not only in the first row, but what happened yesterday. That's one of the main reasons. The peace process played a very important role in the election of Ivan Duque.
So what's the plan? Is the peace plan now in doubt?
I don't think so. The peace process is already signed, has all the attention of the international community. It's going to be really difficult to try to change the DNA of the peace process. Of course, the main course of the negotiations in the future with another guerrilla like the ELN is going to be different from the one that President Santos did with Farc. But what Duque said yesterday was something that I think it was really important, that there are small changes that have to do with the fact that the real victims have to be the center of the political agenda of Duque. But the whole process, in fact, is going to be really difficult to go steps back from what Santos did.
Daniel Garcia Peña, what can be amended? Because there's talk, for instance, under the deal, it's written that you have members of the Farc who get an automatic block of seats in Parliament. Are they going to go back on that? Are they going to go back on amnesties for those who confess to war crimes?
Well, those are all questions that remain to be seen. What we can say is that during the campaign, in the heat of the campaign, the rhetoric was very aggressive on the part of Duque in the first stages of the campaign against the peace process, against central pieces of the peace process. But as the campaign went on, especially between the first and second round, we have seen him modify his discourse. And last night in his victory speech, the part of the speech that you played just a few minutes ago, it seemed taken out of the Santos playbook. I mean, it was Santos that talks about justice and truth and reconciliation. The idea of the victims being in the center of the agreement is one of the elements that the international community has hailed about the Colombian Accord. So at this stage, it is really hard to know exactly how much of that rhetoric of the campaign he will continue to try to put into effect, but also the limits. Your questions about the seats of the Farc in the Congress, for example, is part of our Constitution. The Farc members take office on July 20th. So when Mr. Duque takes office on August 7th, they will already be senators and members of the House of Representatives. So it would require a new constitutional reform, which would take a year at least to take place. So there's a lot of the things that are in place. The special jurisdiction for peace, for example, that is ongoing. The process is beginning. The Truth Commission has already begun their activity. So I feel it's very difficult to go back and to try to reverse those aspects of the agreement that are not only part of Colombian law, but are also part of Colombia's commitments with the international community. But let's not forget that there's another part of the agreements that have not been put into effect, that are in my view at least, and many others view, the part of the most important aspects of the peace agreements, which have to do with agrarian reform, which have to do with political reforms. None of these aspects have been enacted as of yet, and the question is to what degree the Duque administration would have any intent on going forward with those aspects that have been signed into the agreement but have yet been enacted into law.
Yet been enacted into law, the agrarian reform, stopping the inequality in the countryside. Of course, historians might say the reason why people took up arms more than a half century ago, 6 decades ago. On those points, Luis Rivera Velez, if you were a betting man, would you say that Duque is going to make good on that part of the peace deal?
I think probably the piece of the process that it's at stake is these solutions for the agrarian, for the rural world.
That's the crucial bit of the peace deal.
Yes, because what all the economic policy of Duque, it's to try to bring the private investors to the countryside, actually. And we know that this trickle-down economics doesn't work very well, actually, in the country.
Pascal Drouot, you agree? You're relatively pessimistic when it comes to fulfilling that part of the peace deal?
No, in fact, I think that the key point, and all is linked in Colombia, peace, economy, economic growth, the key point during this campaign has been the economy. Colombia is a country where 78% of the population is living in the towns. It is a country, Colombia, twice France, 1 million kilometers. Yes, yeah. It is a country where 28% of the population is living under the level of poverty. So it is a very huge challenge today for the president-elect, Ivan Duque, as in the last years, to find the ways of a new prosperity in Colombia. As you said, today Colombia has a level of economic growth at 1.8. It is not sufficient to create employment, for example. 10% of the population is also living in having unemployed, being unemployed in Colombia. So it is a key point. And of course, people...
So if the economic growth is that low, is the peace process in trouble in a way?
All is linked. Of course, as Hassan Najjar said, today it is no question about the peace process, a peace agreement. That's not the point. Peace is established in Colombia. That's not the point. The point is how can we manage this situation to find the economic growth?
All right, and with this new president who's going to be coming in, you need leadership. One of the big questions is Ivan Duque his own man? His mentor is the former president, Alvaro Uribe. Uribe, who opposed that deal with the Farc. Uribe, who campaigned alongside Duque and insists that the result won't make Colombia more polarized.
I have voted for them because they guarantee growth with social inclusion. They are a guarantee that Colombia will not fall into destructive socialism.
Son garantía para que Colombia no caiga en el destructivo socialismo.
Daniel Garcia Peña, will Duque step out of Uribe's shadow?
That's another huge question that remains to be seen. The fact is that if he is able to do so, he won't be the first one. Remember that 8 years ago, Santos was elected as Uribe's candidate. He had served previously as his defense minister, and his overwhelming victory 8 years ago was seen as a continuation of the Uribe administration. But when Santos decided to negotiate peace with the FARC, that's where the divorce came, and Uribe became the fiercest opponent of President Santos. There are questions today whether Duque will be able to somehow do the same as Santos did in the past. I have doubts about that. On one hand, Santos had a previous experience in government. He had his own base of support. He represents the traditional oligarchy of Bogota and the traditional governing elite. Duque, however, is untested. He's very young. Nobody knew who he was until Uribe decided that he was going to be the candidate of his party, of the Centro Democrático. He has shown as a matter of fact, in the debates and in the campaign, that he has a much more calmer, conciliatory tone. He's not the aggressive hardliner that his mentor is or was when he ran as president. And again, the speech that he gave on last night, it seemed to indicate that he is at least in style trying to forge his own persona. Again, it remains to be seen. Uribe is no doubt the power behind Duque. He has, because in fact he has the experience of what happened 8 years ago with Santos, is going to be much more on the watch to make sure that Duque fulfills what he was elected to do as far as Uribe is concerned. But it's going to be difficult, and I think that Duque will have every day to decide whether he's going to be seen as the puppet of Uribe or whether he will be considered a traitor once again, like Santos was a few years back.
Hassan Nassar, how tight a leash for the new for the president-elect?
Well, I think what Daniel said is right in a sense of what the public and the political parties tried to fulfill in the election, that Duque was a puppet of Uribe. In fact, what happened is that he has his own personality. Yes, of course, he's very young. He's a young senator. It's the first time that he got in Congress. He got there because of the political power of Alvaro Uribe. But we have to say something. Uribe has been winning elections since 2002. He was re-elected in 2006. He put Santos in the presidency in 2010. Then he lost the presidency with his candidate Zuluaga in 2014. But then he won again the political process in the peace process in 2016, and now he won the presidential election with his candidate in 2018. So always Alvaro Uribe is going to be behind his political party. But I believe that we have to see beyond that. Ivan Duque is a new right in Colombia. He's appealing not only to the traditional people who follow Alvaro Uribe in the past. He has the ability to grow a new audience, to go to the center and to the right. And that's why he won this election. He's a new figure in political, young political in Colombia. So I think we cannot underestimate his capability, his own personality. And maybe in the future, what we're going to discuss is the legacy of Alvaro Uribe. He's a man of more than 60 years old. I believe it's time for him to continue his legacy in someone that he trusts, not to revive or to have the same thing that happened in 2010 when he put Santos in the presidency and he got in a different direction. And we believe that all the people, more than 10 million Colombians that decided to support Ivan Duque, they know he got there because of Alvaro Uribe's support, but they expect him to grow up as a president and to have his own decisions, to form a government and to direct the path of this country.
Luis Rivera Velez, you agree?
The issue is that they have very similar, way of thinking about, for example, the drug problem. And that's a main issue now in Colombia. And what President-elect Ivan Duque wants to do, it's what President Uribe did in 2002 and between 2002 and 2010. So he wants to come back to a very hardline on
militarized approach,
militarize the war on drugs again, and why not come back probably to aerial sprayings of coca crops, and we have seen that this affects a lot of community.
So when he's proposing that, is he parroting what Uribe wants, or is Ivan Duque his own man?
Probably, for me, that's the main issue, is that the executive and the parliamentary will have the same ideas, that they will agree on what they want to do. So they could implement either policy they want, because they will have all the votes.
Now you didn't vote for Ivan Duque.
No, I didn't vote for Ivan Duque.
You voted for Gustavo Petro, first left-winger.
I voted for Gustavo Petro in the second round.
Right.
So for me, as a political scientist, I'm very pessimistic about idealistic votes. So I think that, for example, you have to vote for a good candidate. And for me, I wanted some change in the country. So Ivan Duque, for me, didn't represent that change. So I voted for Fajardo in the first round because I thought Fajardo could bring some of the Petro voters to his campaign. And that didn't happen, so then I voted for Petro, of course.
Let's listen to Gustavo Petro conceding gracefully after becoming the first left-wing candidate to reach the second round. All the while, the former guerrilla fighter himself, who was also a mayor of Bogota, vowing to fully play his role in opposition.
I truly do not feel defeated. We are so accustomed to not being in power that we won't die if it was not this time.
Yeah, what was it like, Daniel Garcia Peña, to go to the polls and for the first time to have this choice in the runoff between left and right, which Colombia had never seen?
I think that that's the most important. That's the big news, the headline of what happened in Colombia yesterday. Yes, Duque won, Uribe is behind him, and so forth. But what we've seen is a big change in the political map in Colombia, which I think is a result of the peace process. This was unthinkable in the past to have. We had in the first round, like most normal countries, we had somebody from the extreme left, the center right, the extreme right. I mean, there was for all tastes and for all positions, and there was very important debates on television. There were rallies that we had not seen in the cities throughout the country that hadn't been taking place in decades in Colombia. So there was, I would say, not only the most peaceful election we've ever had, as far as the absence of armed confrontation, but it was the first time that the country was able to put aside the war and the issues that had to do with the peace and talk about health, education, the climate change, what the future of the economy is. So I think that this was a huge step for Colombian democracy as such. And the fact that Gustavo Petro, an ex-guerrilla, that in the past that we've never had that possibility, in fact, that he tripled what had been the previous record of the left back in 2006 when Carlos Gaviria got 2.6 million votes. So we are way beyond the threshold. And I think that part of the reason that maybe President-elect Duque has been more moderate in his tone has to do with the fact that there is 8 million people that voted against him, that there is a left wing and a broader group of independents. I myself voted very similarly to the other guests here. I voted for Fajardo in the first round and for Petro in the second. So it doesn't mean that all the 8 million votes are petristas, as we say here, or followers of Petro. But there's no doubt that there's a broad coalition of independent groups that will have more seats in the Congress that they have ever had. So we're evolving towards what we call a more normal democracy, where you have a group in power, right wing in this case, and you have an opposition on the left that can scrutinize, that can exert control, and that hopefully will allow the policies on the part of the Duque administration to take into account the need for national consensus. His big issue last night, the central topic of his talk was national unity and working together. It remains to be seen whether that's possible or not, but I think the existence of a vibrant opposition and the magnificent campaign that was carried on by Gustavo Petro, it will help Colombia in the long run to develop as a full-fledged democracy.
Hassan Nassar, the worldwide trend when it comes to politics is increased polarization. Listening there to Daniel Garcia Pena, it sounds like Colombia is bucking that trend. Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is that Colombia had two options that were really opposite. The center was in this election step back after Fajardo couldn't pass to the second round. So the fact that Petro and Duque represented two different things from Colombia, and there were sectors in the economy, also in the political agenda, that believed that they were more afraid than Petro. Let me explain this way. Petro, many people voted for Petro because they were afraid of Uribe coming back to the government, to have power again. But at the same time, many people vote for Duque because they were more afraid of Petro in power than Uribe in power. So we have a lot of polarization. The fact that Fajardo decided to go and decided not to approach any of those,
not to endorse
Duque
either,
or Petro, put a sense in the election that there was a lot of population missed. They were missed because they didn't have a candidate to support. The other issue, very important one in this election, is that the traditional political parties, they were destroyed. They were lost in this political campaign. And candidates that were officially the representative of the government of Juan Manuel Santos, like Humberto de la Calle, Germán Vargas Lleras, they were put behind. So Colombians right now, they had to decide between two options. And those two options were very opposite, the one from the other. I believe Gustavo Petro got a very impressive number of votes. 8 million votes is quite amazing, but they're not his votes. There were votes of Sergio Fajardo in there. There were votes also of a lot of people that don't like Petro, but they didn't want Uribe to come back to power with Ivan Duque. So what we are going to see in the future is really how he's going to manage to do the opposition, how he really is going to appeal to the center of the country to support him, to go after a new candidacy in 4 years. Maybe he has a lot of potential of winning the small parts for example, in Bogota, if he wants to run in Bogota, if he wants to run in difficult parts of the country. But to unite again the whole country and to get 8 million votes for the future, I see that very difficult for him.
Very, very difficult. And again, we've been talking about it throughout. It's not just about the Farc and the deal with the peace deal with the rebellion. You were mentioning the issue of growth, Pascal Drouot. You were talking about how the next president is going to tackle the drug problem. There's good news and bad news when it comes to Colombia. If you look at the long run, there are nearly 6 times more tourists than there were a decade ago. But the bad news, the amount of land devoted to growing coca is also up. In an article where The Economist asks if Duque will imperil the peace deal, it writes that in 2016, the raw material for cocaine grew on 146,000 hectares, 3 times the area that it covered in 2012. How do you explain that?
You can explain it but different ways. There is all the peace agreements, and for example, all the policies that the Santos government proposed were an incentive for also farmers that weren't cultivating coca to start cultivating coca because they could benefit probably from some of the aids. That's one thing. That's another thing. It's the decline of the prices of gold, because all this mining, illegal mining, was also very important before 2012. And those prices, those illicit activities have an impact on drug cultivation, on coca cultivation. And so the decline of
the drop in commodity prices
of the prices have an impact, because so the populations go from one illegal domain to another one. And also you have the Farc living up, like going out of the rural areas. So these criminal organized groups going back and trying to recover some of the territory which was occupied by the Farc before.
We can call up on that score. We can call up a map of Colombia and show that there's really a 3-way fight over coca between drug lords, dissidents from the Farc that are still out armed and out there, and that other smaller Marxist group, the ELN, in various parts of the countryside. Pascal Drouot, when you look at this map, the question is Ivan Duque's campaign pledge to militarize more the fight against the drug trade. He's also doing so under pressure from the United States, which gives a lot of aid. Is it the right way to go?
Well, I think it is, of course, a problem with on that point. And as we know, the drug traffic in Colombia is one national security theme for the USA. I mean, so Ivan Duque has engaged himself during the next mandate to reduce the place of production of the drug on 70,000 hectares during the next 4 years.
But is that good or bad?
It is good, of course. That's not only the solution. We know very well that, as you said, that this production and the high level today of production of cocaine is absolutely linked with the end of the stranglehold of official violence, of the disappearance of the Farc organization. It is the reality since those 20 last years. So, of course, in the grounds, land grounds of Colombia, the guys who only knew to use arms, of course, favorize and participate today to these those links of trafficking. But of course, we have also to integrate this situation in the regional reality, regional context. Of course, this difficulty of Colombia, I think that Venezuela is looking with good eye this type of difficulties for Colombia. It is good for this fourth economy in Latin America. Colombia is the fourth economy of Latin America. We're not talking about a small country. We are not talking about small economy. So, of course, these type of problems in Colombia could benefit to Venezuela, for example.
Daniel Garcia Peña, your thoughts on the militarization of the fight against the drug trade, and also, is Donald Trump going to help or hurt this new administration?
Okay, first of all, I think this is the wrong course because it hasn't worked in the past. It's the old recipes that for on one hand, look beyond the realities of demand and supply. That has a lot to do with a continuing demand on the world market. But secondly, the realities in the countryside in Colombia. Unless peasant farmers have alternatives to the coca, all these factors that were mentioned before of the price of commodities and so forth will continue, unfortunately, to make coca an option for vast numbers of peasants in the countryside. So I think that, and ironically, there is this idea that this expansion of the coca is the fault of the peace process, when it's exactly the other way around. The fact that what I mentioned in the beginning, agrarian reform, political reform, and crop substitution that were included in the agreement haven't been enacted, haven't been put into place.
And the threat right now, because there's a threat from the Trump administration to cut back on its aid to Colombia, saying it wants results now on the drug trade. What would happen if Washington makes good on that threat?
Well, to be honest, the idea is that decertification will have a very profound political effect, but in reality, most of the money that goes into the war on drugs in Colombia is our money, is Colombian taxpayers' money. Of course, the U.S. Has given not only money, but the military aid, the helicopters, and so forth. But again, the military option has shown that it is simply not the way forward, and we have to give a chance to what the agreement is established for substitution, for voluntary substitution, for alternatives to the peasants, which involve agrarian reform, building roads, building access, so that the legal crops can be at least
so that there can be an alternative. Earlier, Pascal Drouot mentioning the rivalry with neighboring Venezuela on the campaign trail 2 weeks ago. Ivan Duque went to Cucuta and the Simon Bolivar Bridge that marks the border with Venezuela. An estimated 800,000 have crossed into Colombia, fleeing the violence and the economic meltdown under Nicolas Maduro. Maduro, who again this past weekend lashed out at his neighbors to the west.
A series of incidents and provocations of a military nature from Colombia and within Venezuelan territory are being prepared by the Colombian government of Juan Manuel Santos to generate an armed conflict between Colombia and Venezuela.
Hassan Nassar, what's going to happen in relations between Colombia and Venezuela now?
Well, the relation with Venezuela is in a really bad position, and it doesn't matter which presidents arrived. The thing is that, in fact, in this election, we're very concerned about the migration of Venezuelans crossing the border every year. According to immigration in Colombia, there are more than 800,000 Venezuelans already in the country. And we can say that there's a difficult situation because of the instability in the border. Cities like Cúcuta and Arauca, another part of the border between Colombia and Venezuela, is suffering every single day because of drug trafficking, the control of armed groups that control that area. And right now, even for Ivan Duque, I don't think he's going to change very much the position that President Santos took at the end of his government. In fact, he played a very important role in Venezuela in the political campaign because of the proximity of the populism of Gustavo Petro and the ideas of Chavez and Petro in the past, when they were friends, where they played together a certain vision of Latin America. And right now, Colombia cannot go in a different direction of what Juan Manuel Santos has put Venezuela in the situation in Latin America. I think what we have as a neighbor right now is a country going through the worst political and economic situation in the hemisphere. And we are seeing that even in the international community, trying not to recognize the last election in Venezuela where Nicolas Maduro was re-elected president. So we have to be very careful in Colombia.
Very careful in Colombia,
Ivan Duque
indeed.
knows that. He knows that he has to
be careful. Unfortunately, we're running short on time.
Well,
Hassan Nassar, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Bogota. I want to thank as well Daniel Garcia Peña for being with us from the Colombian capital, Luis Rivera Velez, Pascal Drouot. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.